Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, on Thursday, June the 24th. I'm so happy to be here. This is one child abuse survivor to another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room is open if anybody's up and awake and wants to sit in there. I'm just drinking some coffee and waking up and looking over this article. We're going to continue on looking at emotional abuse. And I found this article on Health Canada's Public Health Agency of Canada website, www.phac-aspc.gc.ca. It's called Emotional Abuse: Information from the National Clearinghouse on Family Violence. And it's it's a pretty good article regarding emotional abuse. What is emotional abuse, and then what it's really all about, how to detect it and whatnot. So that's what we're going to continue on with today. And I'm not a professional. This is not a professional show. I don't hold any professional counseling certificates or therapy certificates. I'm just a person who pays to do my own shows. I really sort of stumbled across Blog Talk Radio by accident. I was just listening to another show, Gail Crabtree's Voices of Hope, Hope for Healing, Voices of Hope, here on Blog Talk Radio. And I just clicked on the button, Create Your Own Show, and before I knew it, I had my own show. And I thought, well, why not? Because I really just want to be one more voice to get some information out to people and to join all the other people out there that are raising their voice to stop child abuse. And I thought, well, as a survivor of child abuse, I thought I'd just include a show regarding child abuse issues, that sort of surround and can plague adult survivors of child abuse. So that's why I thought, well, I'll just continue on and see how many of these shows I'll do. And I really appreciate everybody who's tuning in and catching my shows. It's just awesome. I just thank you all for the support. Really, it gives me the incentive to keep on going and keep on talking. You know what I mean? So I do appreciate it very much. And I'm always studying. I'm a part-time student at MRU here in Calgary, but I'm in between courses. I cannot afford to go back until I get some more funding or get some more money to go. So school has been put on hold, but my researching and looking around and getting involved has not been put on hold. So I continue to do this on a daily basis and study and look into to everything regarding child abuse, child rights. And then, of course, because I'm an adult survivor, I'm a survivor of child abuse, I thought, well, I see a lot of this information, and I like to pass it on, just because I know how hard it is for people. As I suffered really in silence for many, many years, never got any help, and excuse me, I just know how hard it is, to live this daily walk, dealing with all the sort of the leftovers from the abuse that I suffered as a child. And so that's why I wanted to just be sort of a voice out there to say you're not alone, and there is help out there. There's good people out there, which I, had a hard time trusting people, and for so long. I had to actually learn how to do that, as I wanted people to trust me, and so I had to learn how to trust other people. And so I found that there's some awesome people out there, and as soon as I started reaching out, they all started reaching out to me, and which is just amazing. So that's why I thought, I'm just going to, include a show regarding adult survivor issues of child abuse, because it's so important that people know that they're not alone, and that they didn't deserve what happened to them, and that they do deserve, what they do deserve is a good life, right? And if you've been abused, then you would know that how hard it is, and then, of course, to keep continuing to suffer your whole adult life, it's just very sad, because it just seems to me at some point in our lives we deserve to have a good life and not be, riddled with pain, no matter what it is, whether it's physical or emotional or psychological pain that, sort of takes over, and can ruin our lives, you know what I mean? So that's why I just bring information out when I can find it that I think is worth looking at, and just share it. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. So listen at your own discretion, because, the topics of abuse are very sensitive. If you're a person who hasn't experienced a lot of abuse, or maybe you have and you're a survivor and you're not quite far along in your healing, you might want to, if the show is going to bother you, just turn it off, because, nobody wants to be triggered. That's the whole thing. You can, people can be triggered. Adult survivors of child abuse can be triggered by many things. And so you have to kind of know where you're at in your healing when you're listening to my shows, because it could trigger you. The information that I'm reading or something I might be talking about could trigger you. So you have to listen at your own discretion. Make sure you don't be triggered, and if you find the topic upsetting, just please turn it off. And that's why I always tell people what we're talking about. So today we're going to continue on with emotional abuse and continue going through this article and finish it off probably. And if you're a young person under the age of 18, a really young person, like a young child, I just hope that you would have someone okay it, that you can listen to this show, because I don't know where the Blog Talk players are now. And I really, you'd be doing yourself a favor and me a favor if you get permission to listen to my shows. Have someone listen to an archive just to check out what we're talking about on here. And then they can help you make the decision whether or not you should be listening. And also they can help you if you have questions regarding what I'm talking about. Not a whole lot of people are talking about abuse in the mainstream, in mainstream society. So you might not have heard a lot about this stuff. It might be kind of confusing. You might be thinking, wow, I've never heard of that. What is that? How does that happen? And because not a whole lot of people talk about it, it could be kind of scary for some young people and also kind of confusing. So you should have someone with you that can help you to find some information if you just need more information regarding what I'm actually talking about. I just fight to save children's lives, you know what I mean? And I really fight for children's rights, and I really fight for child online safety. So that's why I ask all young children under the age of 18 to make sure that somebody is listening to this with you and that they know you're listening to it, and that way they can approve or disapprove of whether or not they think you should be listening to it. Because there's a lot of adult material on here, even though it's ultimately about stopping child abuse and helping to save children's lives, changing this thing for the better for children. There is a lot of adult material on here, so that's why. And I don't know how young the listeners are these days, right? So that's you make sure that you keep yourself safe online and let someone know what you're doing when you're online. So you could save your life and you could save your friends' lives, right? So we're going to get right into the rest of this article here. And we left off yesterday taking a look at the sort of some of the not necessarily the stats, but facts to consider regarding emotional abuse, and we went over that pretty good. The next portion of this is detecting emotional abuse, and we'll just continue on right there. Emotional abuse may be difficult to detect. However, personal awareness and understanding of the issue is key to recognizing it. The following indicators may assist in detecting emotional abuse. And like emotional abuse, they have like a little chart here and they list a whole bunch of stuff. We'll go over that. Physical abuse, of course, is a lot easier to detect, for signs and symptoms and whatnot, right? You can see the bruises, you can see the scars, the burns, the physical abuse, right? That's, the signs and symptoms are there. But emotional abuse is a lot different. And people, if you don't know what to look for, if you don't know the signs and symptoms of emotional abuse, then you wouldn't maybe know that a child was being emotionally or verbally or psychologically abused, right? So it's important to know the signs and symptoms of all the different types of abuse, and then to sort of be on the lookout and be aware, taking a look at the children in our own lives to make sure that they're not being abused, whether it's physically, emotionally, psychologically, or sexually, you know what I mean? We have to protect these children, right? And if you have children, you have to protect your children, so you want to be up on these things and know the signs and symptoms of all the different types of abuse, right? So possible indicators of emotional abuse and neglect, and these are just this is just a listing that they have, and some, even if these children showed these signs, doesn't necessarily mean that there is emotional abuse and neglect. I think that it's just that these are commonly sort of seen in children, even adults who experience emotional abuse, and so they're listed here. But it doesn't mean that if a person has some of these or part of these symptoms that they would have be experiencing emotional abuse. That's important to know. They don't list that here, but I know on all the research that I do, they quite often say that because, they might not be experiencing emotional abuse. They might have some sort of some mental issues that are going on, and they might be living in a completely loving home, but they still might be showing some of these signs here, and it might be due to the fact there might be a chemical imbalance in the brain. Could be maybe there's something going on at school. You know what I mean? Not necessarily in the home. So that's why, but it is important to recognize this stuff, because then you can get that child some help, regardless of whether or not they're being abused in the home or not. If you see a child who's showing these signs, then you know something's wrong, and that's what you'll see this when I read them off. And you can get this information too, just by going to this website, www.phac-aspc.gc.ca, and that's the Public Health Agency of Canada. Their website there. So it's worth taking a look at. So children, and this is possible indicators of emotional abuse and neglect. Children would be depression, withdrawal, low self-esteem, severe anxiety, fearfulness, failure to thrive in infancy, aggression, emotional instability, sleep disturbances, physical complaints with no medical basis, inappropriate behavior for age or development, overly passive or compliant. So either one way or the other, they'd be really passive or extremely compliant or aggressive, right? Suicide attempts or discussion of suicide, extreme dependence, underachievement, inability to trust, stealing, and other forms of abuse present or suspected. So if you see children with these types of symptoms and they're behaving in this way, severe anxiety, low self-esteem, depression, no child should really be depressed or experiencing low self-esteem or severe anxiety unless there's something wrong. You know what I mean? If you see like all of this stuff, especially suicide attempts, talking about suicide, inability to trust, and just inappropriate behavior for their age or development, there's probably some problems there, obviously, right? Children don't normally behave like that. So, they might have their moments of at certain times of maybe they just feel a little bit down or you know what I mean? But not depression, you know what I mean? That's just not at all normal. So that's why it's important to know these signs and symptoms, right? For adults, it's sort of the same thing, right? Depression, withdrawal, low self-esteem, severe anxiety, fearfulness, it's the same thing. Feelings of shame and guilt, frequent crying, self-blame, self-depreciation, overly passive or compliant, social isolation, delay or refusal of medical treatment, discomfort or nervousness around caregiver or relative. And this would be signs of emotional abuse in adults, like whether it's an elderly person or whether it's a domestic violence situation. Suicide attempts or discussion, and substance abuse, avoidance of eye contact, and other forms of abuse present or suspected. So pretty much the same, whether it's for children or adults. If you see this sort of thing happening quite a bit, then that there's got to be some problems going on. Because even adults don't experience, a lot of these different symptoms unless there's something wrong. You know what I mean? And so that's why it is very important to know and take a look at what's going on around people, with people in your family and people in your life. If they're experiencing these things and it's just not normal, it's not normal behavior. Most people are, they might have a period of time where something's just really made them upset, maybe a death in the family or something like that. But we're talking, if this is something that you see on a regular basis and they're crying all the time, blaming themselves, very anxious, low self-esteem, suicide attempts and things like that, that's something very serious, and it's definitely something to check out and make sure that you get that person some help. Legal interventions, it says, legal intervention in cases of child emotional abuse and neglect is governed by provincial and territorial child protection legislation. And this article, of course, is a Canadian article, right? Most jurisdictions require that alleged or suspected child emotional abuse or neglect be reported to child protection authorities or the police. In some jurisdictions, failure to report child emotional abuse or neglect may result in a fine or imprisonment. And that's just it's the law. We have to report child abuse. It's the law, so you have to report it. So if a person knew about the abuse, whether it was physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, they don't report it, there could be fine and imprisonment as well. And I agree with that. If a person knows that a child's being abused and they do nothing at all to help that child, then they should have to be penalized right along with the other abuser who is actually doing the abusing, right? Because we have an obligation as a society to protect children. So if you know someone's being abused or you know a child's being abused, you have to do the right thing and make the phone call, right? Emotionally abusive behavior such as repeatedly following the other person or someone known to her or him, intimidating or attempting to intimidate, repeatedly communicating directly or indirectly with the other person or someone known to that person, harassing the other person with telephone calls, besetting or watching the other person's house or the place of work, engaging in threatening conduct directed at the other person or member of her or his family is criminal harassment. And these behaviors must cause a person to fear for her or his own safety or the safety of someone else that they know, right? So that's criminal harassment when people do stuff like that, stalking and whatnot, and it can cause a lot of emotional problems, you know what I mean? Other forms of emotional abuse, such as insulting, isolating, infantilizing, Humiliating and ignoring, although serious, are not criminal behaviors and cannot be prosecuted under the Criminal Code of Canada. So, unless it's actually something that could cause a person to fear for their own life, then I guess they don't consider it to be a criminal offense, right? And cannot be prosecuted under the Criminal Code of Canada. Now, when this is when this article came out, so who knows whether that's changed or not. I'd have to do the research on it. But the thing is it's just wrong to see this happening to people, right? And it says here, what can you do if you are being abused? Remember, you are not alone. It is not your fault, and no one deserves to be abused, and help is available. It says if you suspect or know that someone is being abused, listen, believe, support. Let the person know about available support services. Report suspected or known child abuse or neglect to a child welfare agency or the police. And it says here, if you are a service provider, work with the other organizations to increase awareness of emotional abuse, address the needs of those who have been or are being emotionally abused, and keep informed of resources and materials relating to intervention and prevention of abuse. It says here where to go for support services: 24-hour helplines or distress lines, transition houses or shelters, social service agencies, child welfare or family services agencies, police, legal aid service, health professionals, nurses, doctors, dentists, whatnot, community health centers, public health department, community counseling centers, home support agencies, senior centers, community living associations, friendship centers, and religious organizations. So, and then they also, on this article, if you go and pull it up, there's all kinds of links and whatnot to different websites, and they have lots of references and stuff like that, and great information here. So regarding emotional abuse, so for anybody who wants to continue looking at that from the Public Health Agency of Canada, it's a great article, and I like it. I wanted to look at also the Adult Survivors of Child Abuse Morris Center Programs Survivor to Thriver workbook. Excuse me. This is a great workbook, and we actually did this not too long ago. Went through the whole workbook, and it's a huge workbook. I forget how many pages it is, but 115 pages long or something like that. And the first 30-something pages are all on safety first, just to really recognize whether we're safe enough in a safe enough place as a survivor of child abuse, going on our healing journey, whether we're even safe enough to do the workbook. So it's very important to know that. But it's a great workbook, and I really like it. I plan on actually going through it and doing it myself on my own time, working through it. But they have an article here regarding emotional abuse, and they do talk about it, and this is really based on and for adult survivors of child abuse, right? So I thought we might take a look at this, and you can get this information at www.ascasupport.org, and that's Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, a Morris Center program. That's their website, and on there they have links to like all kinds of different resources, right? They have peer-to-peer online groups. If the ASCA is hosting meetings in certain cities around the country, you can actually attend those meetings. And I know in Canada they don't. I don't know about the whole of Canada. I know that in Calgary they don't. There's no hosting of ASCA meetings, so I'd have to go online and actually become part of an online community. So I haven't done that yet, but I would like to. I've just been so extremely busy. But I think it would be very helpful. This is a great website, and the Survivor to Thriver workbook is awesome. So for anybody who hasn't checked it out, it's a free download. You just click on it and bring it up. You can print it. You can just download it to your computer, whatever you want to do. And they do suggest that people have someone go through the workbook with them so that they're not alone. And just in case it brings up a lot of memories and a lot of painful feelings, if you have someone there with you, especially a support person or your partner, who's helping you to get through this, all the the tough times regarding the extremely hard times regarding adult survivor issues of child abuse on our healing journey, they really suggest that we have someone with us when we're doing the workbook and not be on our own, because it can be very painful. It actually does bring up a lot of stuff that's why it's a good workbook. It actually helps us to work through a lot of what we went through as children being abused, right? So that's the whole issue. But there's a section here on emotional abuse. I just thought I'd read it. It says, emotional abuse is defined as a pattern of psychologically destructive interactions with a child that is characterized by 5 steps of behaviors, which we already kind of went over on the other article there, but it's rejecting, isolating, terrorizing, ignoring, and corrupting. It says emotional abuse involves the use of words as weapons, and the scars left may be more psychological than physical, which makes emotional abuse harder to identify. Physical signs of emotional abuse may include malnutrition or malnourishment, small physical stature, poor grooming, inappropriate attire for the season or circumstances. Behavioral signs that may suggest emotional abuse include constant approval seeking, self-criticism, letting oneself be taken advantage of, excessive timidity or quiet aggression, indecisiveness, fear of rejection from others, verbally hostile, provocative or abusive behavior. Because these signs can result from other social and environmental causes, we again encourage, this is the adult survivors of child abuse, they encourage us to take a look at assessing our own personal experiences. And it says, because much emotional abuse consists of words, and because the use and the meanings of words are highly subjective, it is harder to quantify and clarify examples of emotional abuse. What is heard as abusive language by one child may be the norm for another, although it still may be abusive, even if it is not so classified by the community. Similarly, much emotional abuse consists of acts of omission rather than commission, and so there may not be a sign or symptom to point to as evidence. And for these and other reasons, it is difficult to generate accurate statistics on the occurrence of emotional abuse, right? Emotional abuse, more than physical or sexual abuse, must be measured in terms of severity. It is deemed mild when the acts are isolated incidents, moderate when the pattern is more established and generalized, and severe when acts are frequent, absolute, and categorical. And all parents are emotionally abusive to their children at certain times, it says here. Parents are not perfect, and they too are subject to stresses and strains of daily living that may cause them to lash out at others. It is especially important to determine whether there is an established pattern of verbal abuse or mental cruelty in order to label the behavior emotional abuse. And emotional abuse is the least understood and perhaps the most controversial of the three types of abuse because of the confusion about how to define and describe it. It was psychologist James Garbarino who defined emotional abuse in terms of the 5 behavioral clusters described below. And so they go on to talk about rejecting and terrorizing, ignoring, isolating, and the corrupting. And then they have these journal questions where they ask these questions, and they just go on to talk about it a little bit. So it is a great workbook, and I'll just start reading through there. But emotional abuse, I wrote a book, and you can pick it up if you'd like. It's called The Life of Death, The Redemption. It's available at Lulu, lulu.com, Scheer and Potter Books. That's Kshir, Scheer, and Potter, Potter, Books. And you can find that on lulu.com. Or you can just type in my name, Lori Ann Smith, or you can type in A Life of Death, The Redemption, or you can pick it up from my website here on Blog Talk Radio just by clicking down at the bottom on the main show page. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, the link should be there. And the book, I detail a lot of the emotional abuse and psychological abuse that went on in our home, and really what it did and what it caused our family to go through, because it went on for our lifetimes. It wasn't just an isolation, maybe like 1 or 2 times an isolated event. This was something that we grew up with. We grew up hearing this stuff, and we grew up experiencing this stuff, and it just went on and on forever. So that's the whole issue. I really detail a lot of the personal experiences that I went through, and that my mom had gone through, and that various members of my family went through. And it's just, emotional abuse is so extremely damaging. It can really, it can destroy people. Abuse doesn't have to be physical or sexual to destroy people. Verbal abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, is very damaging, and it's so hard to prove to prove that it's actually happening, and that a child would be experiencing emotional abuse. So that's why it's so important to take a look around at the children in your life, make sure that people are treating them right. And, if you see someone berating a child and constantly yelling at them and making them feel bad, terrorizing them, rejecting them, making them feel like useless and worthless, ignoring them even, just not caring about them, terrorizing them and threatening them, isolating, if you see someone doing that to a child, you want to make sure you get that child some help. Right? Because otherwise, the abuse doesn't have to be physical just to want to get a child some help. You know what I mean? Emotional abuse is very serious, and it causes so many problems for people later on in life. As they have to try to get themselves straightened out. Generally, it took me 41 years just to realize that I wanted to fight to live instead of always thinking that I shouldn't even be on the planet and that I probably would never be out of this pain. And that's the whole issue. It can take people their whole lives to recover from emotional abuse, because emotional abuse is present in all the different forms of abuse. It'll be there with the physical abuse. It'll be there with the sexual abuse. It'll be there with all the different types of abuse. So that's why, it's so incredibly hard to get over. I would just hope that people would not do that to their children, and that they would, if you know of a child who's being abused in any way, that you would report it and make sure you get that child some help, right? And we'll just take a look at this. Rejecting involves the adult's refusal to acknowledge the child's worth and legitimacy of the child's needs. Children experience rejection and abandonment when parents act in ways that minimize the child's importance or value. During infancy, this may involve not returning the infant's smiles or misinterpreting crying as manipulation. In later years, it may include refusing to hug the child, placing the child away from the family, scapegoating the child for family problems, and subjecting the child to verbal humiliation and excessive criticism. The child begins to think, quote unquote, if my parents don't think I matter, then I must not be very worthwhile. If I'm not very worthwhile, maybe they will abandon me. So this is something that a child could think if they've gone through that, and so many of us have experienced that, and we know what it's like. Terrorizing includes verbally assaulting, bullying, or frightening the child, thereby creating a climate of fear that the child generalizes to the world at large. And terrorizing usually involves threatening the child with some kind of extreme punishment or dire outcome, one that is clearly beyond the child's ability to respond or protect himself or herself. The end result is that the child experiences profound fear and is left on his or her own psychological imaginings. Examples of terrorizing vary according to the child's age, it says. During infancy, the parents may deliberately violate the child's tolerance for change or intense stimuli by teasing, scaring, or engaging in unpredictable behavior. As the child grows older, the terrorizing may take form of verbal intimidation, forcing the child to make unreasonable decisions, such as choosing between competing parents, constant raging at the child, or threatening to expose or humiliate the child in public. In families that practice strict religions, fundamentalists, and other sects like SECT, right, fundamentalists, children can be terrorized by parents who put the fear of God in them or threaten them with the devil's wrath should they not behave. So there's different types of terrorizing and different ways people do terrorize their children. It might not have anything to do with physical abuse, but when it does, if you're terrorizing if a child's terrorized at the same time as being physically abused, then that's a horrible way to grow up. And, that's how we grew up. Our parents were, constantly assaulting and bullying us and frightening us, and also throwing in the physical abuse as well. And so it was very, very hard to get over that, right? You grow up and you become an adult, and all of a sudden you have to deal with all that. And it's very, very hard. We have just about a couple of minutes left. Ignoring entails depriving the child of essential stimulation and responsiveness, thereby stifling emotional growth and intellectual development. Ignoring refers to the condition in which, due to excessive preoccupation with their own issues, the parents are emotionally unavailable to the child, and in contrast to rejecting, which is actively abusive, ignoring is passive and neglectful. Ignoring behaviors include not responding to the child's talk, not recognizing the child's developing abilities, leaving the child without appropriate adult supervision, not protecting the child from physical or emotional assault by siblings or friends, not showing interest in the child's school progress and focusing on other relationships such as a new partner, so to the point that the child feels displaced. Emotional neglect may be the most common type of abuse, but it may also be the least reported. That's for sure, because so many people experience, everyone experiences some emotional abuse. But we're talking about systematic abuse, that continues on and actually is very damaging to a child, right? Well, we have about a minute left. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. You can check our website out for more information on signs and symptoms at www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. And we have lots of information on there. We have a child abuse handbook. It's a free PDF download, and you can get that just by going to the website or go to Lulu, Sharon Potter Books, and pick up the free PDF. It's a PDF download. The child abuse handbook is written and it's compiled by Donna Shear and Sandra Potter, and they compiled it and made it into one handy reference book for people to know the signs and symptoms and how to report abuse, and really it's got some great information in there. I hope everybody will get their copy. I know I did, and it's a great booklet, right, for a handbook for people. So make sure you tune in tonight, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio. We have Elizabeth Roberts-Brawley on tonight at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then tomorrow night Donna Shear and myself will be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, and I'll be back on tomorrow morning again with One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, same time, 6 a.m. And until then, make sure you take care of yourselves. Everybody have a great day. And again, I thank you for tuning in. And make sure that you just keep holding on. If you need something or you need more information, and you need resources or references, let me know, because I'm available. And just you can contact me on Blog Talk Radio, send me a message, or you can just contact me on Facebook. But, make sure you don't suffer in silence and just suffer on your own. And, it's so sad to say, I know because I did it myself. I know how hard it is, to wake up every day and just think, when is this pain going to end? Well, just keep holding on because it can happen. And I'm living proof, and I know so many survivors who are. You have to, but it is up to you ultimately to hold on, and you have to reach out, and you have to get some help, right? You cannot just sit and suffer in silence, and then, you really have to be proactive and say, I want to have a good life, I want to hold on there. I deserve to have a good life. And that's what I did. I started telling myself these things, and before I knew it, I was on my road to my healing journey, right? And so that's what I would wish for everybody. So make sure you do reach out and get some help, no matter what way it is, peer support, group support, online group support, therapy, counseling, whatever it is. Make sure you do reach out and get some help, and don't suffer alone. Just don't, suffer in silence by yourself alone for the rest of your life. That is just not a good way to live. And we've already been abused, so we know that we deserve the best that we can possibly get in this life, and really it's only going to happen if we do it. Nobody else is going to do it, and nobody can do it. They cannot. I wanted people to take away the pain, and I really wanted people to. I was always hoping that someone would come into my life who could take away the pain, and they couldn't. And that's why at the age of 41, I was still sitting around saying, how long am I going to continue to suffer like this? And then I realized that it was going to be up to me. I was going to have to do it. And that I wanted to fight to have a good life. And I thought, it's going to have to be me to do this. And I got off the couch and I started getting proactive. And that's what I hope everybody will do. And not allow yourself to continue to have a horrible life just due to the abuse that you suffered that wasn't even your fault in the first place. And that's where I was just fed up and frustrated. And I said, enough is enough. I've already suffered enough under those people, and no more. So I just broke those chains. I started talking, and I'm not going to stop talking. So take care, everybody. Make sure that you do get help and hang in there. And if you need something, like I said, just get a hold of me. Have a great day, and we'll be talking to you real soon. Bye-bye.